The tie was too tight. That's what I remember first. The specific pressure at my throat. Not quite pain, just awareness, like a hand resting on your shoulder in a crowded room. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror on the 14th floor of the Meridian Hotel, adjusting the knot for the third time, and Claire appeared behind me in the reflection. She was wearing the navy dress, the one with the thin gold zipper along the spine. She smelled like the cedar and bergamot perfume I'd bought her in Portland 2 years ago. She looked beautiful in the way that had become, over 11 years, a familiar thing, something I acknowledged rather than felt. "You're going to pull it apart," she said, and reached up and fixed the knot in 2 practiced movements. "Better." "Much." She held my gaze in the mirror for a half-second longer than necessary, then turned and picked up her clutch from the bed. That half-second. I've thought about it a lot since. I used to tell myself it meant nothing. She was checking her lipstick in the reflection or distracted by something on her phone. But I don't tell myself that anymore. The Meridian's ballroom held 300 people that night. Halstead Logistics had been planning the annual client gala for 6 months. My 6 months, specifically, since I'd moved into the VP role in January and inherited the event as one of my first visible responsibilities. 17 vendors. A catering contract that had required 4 revisions. A keynote speaker who'd canceled in March and been replaced in April. The seating chart alone had taken 2 full weekends. I had built the evening from nothing, and standing at the entrance to the ballroom at 6:47 p.m., watching the room fill with people in good clothes holding champagne flutes, I felt something close to pride. Claire stood beside me, smiling at faces she recognized, touching my arm at the right moments. She had done this for 11 years, attended my company events with the practiced warmth of someone who understood that a VP's wife is also, in some quiet way, a professional presence. She was good at it. She remembered names, asked follow-up questions about things people had mentioned at previous events, laughed at the right pitches. I had always admired that about her. Our daughter Lily was at home with Claire's mother, Ruth. Ruth had driven in from Dayton that afternoon, which had surprised me slightly. The drive was 2 hours, and Claire hadn't mentioned the visit until that morning at breakfast, almost as an aside, while she was reading something on her phone. "Mom's coming to watch Lily tonight," she'd said, not looking up. She wanted to see her anyway. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. The evening moved the way these evenings always move, in waves. The cocktail hour loosened people. Dinner formalized them. The speeches tightened the room back into attention, and then the open bar after loosened everything again for good. I gave my remarks at 8:15, for minutes at the podium, prepared and rehearsed, but delivered with what I hoped felt like ease. There was genuine applause. My boss, Dennis, caught my eye from table 7 and gave a small nod that meant something specific in the language of corporate approval. I was shaking hands at the edge of the room when I first noticed the man at table 11. He was talking to Claire. That was not unusual. Claire talked to many people that evening. But there was something about the geometry of it, the way she'd turned her body fully toward him, the way her right hand held her wine glass loosely at her side rather than near her chest, where she usually held it when she was listening politely. Her chin was slightly lifted. Her posture was not the posture of small talk. He was tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples. A good suit. The kind of easy confidence that reads immediately across a room. I didn't recognize him, which was odd. I knew, by that point, nearly everyone in the ballroom. I watched them for perhaps 10 seconds before Dennis appeared at my elbow to introduce me to someone from the Cincinnati office, and I turned away. I didn't think about it again until we were in the car. "Good night," Claire said, looking out the passenger window at the dark street. Not a question. "Really good, I think." Dennis seemed happy. The Meridian was 12 minutes from our house in Bexley. Claire was quiet for most of them. Not the comfortable silence we'd built over a decade, but something slightly different. Charged, or maybe just tired. I told myself it was tired. Events exhausted her. She'd said so before. I pulled into the driveway, and she was out of the car before I'd turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment in the dark, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see the light in the kitchen, Ruth's shadow moving behind the curtain. I thought, briefly, about the man at table 11, his name, his company, whether I'd somehow missed him in the guest list. Then I went inside. I would not think about him again for 11 more days. There is a particular quality to a marriage in its 11th year that is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't lived it. It is not unhappy, necessarily. It is not the burning thing it was in the beginning, but it is also not cold. It is something more like a system, functional, familiar, running on the accumulated habits of thousands of shared mornings. You know which side of the bed the other person will drift toward in their sleep. You know what silence means after a difficult conversation. You know the difference between the kind of quiet that is peaceful and the kind that is waiting. We had built a good life in Columbus. Claire's design studio had grown steadily over 5 years. She had a small office on High Street, 2 part-time assistants, a client list that generated real income. I had moved through Halstead at a pace I was privately proud of. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Bexley with a yard that Lily used constantly and a kitchen that Claire had renovated the year before in a palette she described as warm industrial. We had a dog named Fletcher, a yellow lab with a collapsing hip who'd been with us since before Lily was born. We had dinner as a family 4 nights a week. We went to Lily's soccer games on Saturdays. On the surface, we were exactly what we appeared to be. The first sign came 8 days after the gala, and I almost missed it entirely. I was in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, standing at the counter with coffee, checking my phone, when Claire came downstairs already dressed. She was usually the second one down, and usually in a robe. She had on a charcoal blazer I didn't recognize. New jacket. I asked. I've had it. She poured coffee without looking at me. I accepted this. People have clothes they haven't worn in a while. It wasn't a lie I could call anything other than possible. But I noticed, later that day, scrolling through our shared credit card app out of routine habit, a charge from 2 weeks prior at Aldridge & Co., which I knew was a boutique on Short North that Claire had mentioned once in passing. $94. The date was the same day as the gala. I didn't think much of it. She'd bought something to wear to the event, or near it. That was reasonable. I closed the app. The second sign came 4 days later, on a Monday. Claire had a studio day. She went in Mondays and Wednesdays as a rule. But she called me at 3 in the afternoon to say she was running late. A client consult had extended. She got home at 7, when dinner was already on the table and Lily had started without her. She kissed Lily on the top of the head and sat down and was lighter than usual, almost animated, and I thought, good day at work. Those happened. What I noticed, quietly, without assigning it meaning, was that when I handed her a glass of wine, she set it down almost immediately and went to pour herself water instead. Not drinking tonight. Headache coming on. She'd had wine at dinner 3 days before without any issue. I didn't ask further. The third sign, and this one I have returned to many times since, with the particular shame of someone who knew something was wrong and chose the easier interpretation, was the phone. Claire had always been open with her phone. Not performatively so, not in the way of someone proving a point, but naturally. She'd leave it on the counter face up. She'd hand it to me to look something up if her hands were full. That Thursday evening, she set it face down on the arm of the couch before sitting beside me to watch television. She picked it up twice during the show, angled slightly away, and set it down again. When Lily called her from upstairs, she took it with her. Looking back now, I can identify that evening as the first moment I actually felt something. Not thought it, not calculated it, but felt it, somewhere below the sternum. A quiet, sourceless weight that I immediately, deliberately, put down. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the event had been stressful and I was still decompressing. I told myself that people angle their phones away all the time, that it meant nothing. I understand now that denial isn't weakness. It's a decision. You choose it because the alternative costs more than you're ready to pay. That night on the couch, watching a television show I can't now name, I chose not to know. Not because I lacked the evidence, but because I lacked the willingness to follow it. The following Saturday at Lily's soccer game, I spoke to our neighbor Jeff Caraway for the first time since the gala. Jeff's daughter played on the same team. We stood along the sideline with coffee and talked about nothing important, the field conditions, the league standings. Then, without any particular lead-in, Jeff said, "Hey, Claire seemed like she was having a good time the other night. She know that guy well." "Which guy?" "The one she was talking to most of the night. Older fella, dark hair." I only saw them from across the room, but they looked pretty deep in conversation. I kept my expression level. "Client, I think." "I'm not sure." "Good event," Jeff said. "Dennis must be pleased." We watched Lily's team score a goal, and the sideline erupted, and the conversation moved on. But something had shifted. The thing I'd set down in the couch that Thursday picked itself back up. Suspicion, in my experience, does not arrive like a storm. It seeps in, the way cold air finds the gap around an old window frame, slowly, gradually, until you realize the room has been getting colder for a long time and you only just noticed. I did not begin investigating Claire. That would come later. What I did, in those weeks following the gala, was simply begin to pay a different quality of attention. The same sensory information, her movements, her voice, her habits, ran through a different filter. And once you change the filter, you cannot change it back. Her phone remained face down. Not always, not obviously, but consistently enough that the pattern was visible once I was watching for it. She began going to the studio on Fridays, which had not been her habit previously. When I mentioned it once, casually, over dinner, she said she had a large residential project ramping up and needed the extra day. I asked about the project. She gave me reasonable details: a young couple, older home in German village, gut renovation of the main floor. She knew the names, the address, the timeline. It was a convincing answer. I checked the Ohio Board of Building Standards contractor filings 3 days later, out of a curiosity I couldn't entirely defend. The permit was there. The project was real. Claire was listed as the interior designer. I felt ashamed of the check and relieved by its result, and I told myself that was the end of it. It wasn't. On a Wednesday in early November, I came home from work 40 minutes earlier than usual. A meeting had ended early and found the house empty. Fletcher was in the backyard. Claire's car was gone. Lily was at Ruth's for the week. Ruth had offered to take her for fall break, which had seemed generous and which I had accepted without examining too closely. I called Claire. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hey," she said. Her voice had that particular quality of someone composing themselves quickly. "You're home?" "Yeah. Early. Where are you?" "Studio. I told you. The German Village project. I've been here all day. I'm leaving soon." "Okay." She was home in 22 minutes. The studio was 18 minutes from the house. Nothing about that was impossible. But I stood in the kitchen, watching the driveway through the window, and I thought about the 4 rings. I thought about the particular texture of her voice in that first syllable. And I thought, for the first time with real clarity, that I was not imagining this. The man from the gala returned to my mind. I had never learned his name. The guest list for the gala was still in my work email, archived. I pulled it up that evening in my office, after Claire had gone to bed. 287 names, organized by company. I went through them slowly, building a mental image of everyone I knew, flagging anyone I didn't. There were 31 names I couldn't immediately place. I narrowed it by company to clients we'd brought in through the Cincinnati region, since that's where we'd expanded most recently. The name I found, eventually, after cross-referencing with the company directory, was Daniel Holt, age 44, independent supply chain consultant out of Chicago. He'd been brought in by one of our regional VPs as a potential contract resource. He had been at the gala legitimately. He had sat at table 11. I looked at his company website. There was a headshot. Dark hair, silver at the temples, easy in front of the camera. The man from the ballroom. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. What I felt was not rage. Not yet. What I felt was closer to the sensation of a lock turning, a mechanism engaging, something settling into a new position that you knew was permanent. The red herring arrived the following week. Ruth called on a Tuesday and asked, with her particular blend of casual and waited, whether Claire and I were doing all right. I said yes, of course. Why? She hesitated. That specific Ruth hesitation that meant she was editing something, and then said that Claire had seemed a little distracted on the phone lately and she just wanted to check in. I thanked her. We hung up. That same week, Claire came home one evening visibly upset, red around the eyes, short with Lily at dinner, silent at dishes. When I asked quietly, she said the German Village clients had pushed back on a significant budget item and it had been a difficult conversation. Her distress was real. I could see it. She cried a little that night, which Claire almost never did, and I held her while she did, and I felt, against my better understanding, the terrifying warmth of believing her. For 2 days, I wondered if I was wrong about everything. I wasn't. There is a particular moral vertigo that comes with investigating someone you love. It is not clean. You are, in those moments, doing something that would break the other person if they knew. Reading their movements, testing their stories, constructing surveillance out of ordinary life. You tell yourself it's justified because you need to know. But you also know that the act itself changes you. that once you've looked through someone's life like that, you have altered something irreversible in how you see them and how you see yourself. I became methodical. I did not touch her phone. I did not hire anyone. What I did was document. I began noting the times she left and returned from the studio, cross-referenced against her calendar, which we shared on our phones for scheduling purposes. She had always entered her appointments, client meetings, vendor visits, design showrooms, and for 2 years I had never looked at them with any scrutiny. I looked now. The pattern I found was this. Every Friday, from 10 in the morning to between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, her calendar showed R&D/sourcing, a recurring block she'd apparently set up weeks before. I called the design showroom she used most frequently on the pretext of confirming an order she'd placed for a home project. The woman on the phone checked her records and told me, very pleasantly, that Ms. Webb hadn't been in since early October. R&D/sourcing. 5 Fridays in a row. I noted this without acting on it. I kept watching. The second thread arrived through our daughter, and this one still costs me something to recount. Lily, who was 9 and perceptive in the way that children that age can be without knowing what they're perceiving, said something to me one evening in October while I was helping her with homework. We were at the kitchen table, working through a geography worksheet, and she said, not looking up from her paper, "Mom was on the phone a really long time last night." Yeah, she was in the backyard. It was cold. Lily wrote something down. She was laughing. I kept my voice neutral. That's good. She was probably talking to Aunt Michelle. She calls Aunt Michelle on Sundays, Lily said, with the casual authority of a child who has tracked these patterns without meaning to. This was Thursday. I said nothing to that. I ruffled her hair and redirected us to the worksheet. But that detail, Lily's voice, the geography paper, the image of Claire laughing in the cold backyard at night, has stayed with me with a clarity I didn't ask for. I hadn't been building a marriage, I realized, in those days after that conversation. I'd been maintaining the appearance of one, and somewhere along the way, I had mistaken the maintenance for the thing itself. The red herring that almost unmade me came in the 3rd week. Claire's assistant, a 26-year-old named Priya, called me on a Wednesday afternoon. She had Claire's old phone listed as an emergency contact for the studio, and Claire had apparently updated the number incorrectly. Priya seemed embarrassed. In the course of apologizing, she mentioned that Claire had been really stressed lately about a supplier issue for the German Village project. The supplier, a millwork company in Indiana, had missed 2 delivery windows. It was a legitimate professional crisis. I went back to my documentation and recalculated. Some of those long Fridays could be explained by a genuine professional emergency. The distracted evenings, the tears, those fit. I had perhaps been seeing pattern where there was noise. For 4 days I questioned everything I'd gathered. Then, on a Friday morning when Claire had left early for her sourcing block, I drove past the building where Daniel Holt maintained a Columbus office. I had found it, eventually, through a LinkedIn cross-reference with one of Halstead's Chicago contacts. I told myself I was just in the area. I told myself it wasn't surveillance. Her car was parked outside. I sat across the street for 40 minutes. Then I drove home, went upstairs, changed clothes, and went to work. I didn't say a word to anyone. I had known for 3 weeks before I did anything. 3 weeks during which I slept beside her, ate dinner with her, helped Lily with homework while Claire washed the dishes. 3 weeks during which I understood everything and showed nothing, not out of cowardice, but out of something more deliberate. I wanted to be certain. I wanted the moment to be mine, not hers. The second Halstead event of the year was a smaller affair, a client appreciation dinner at the Arch Street Grill, 40 people, a private room in the back. My idea, originally, a more intimate version of the gala, I'd pitched it as a way to deepen relationships with our top-tier accounts. Dennis had approved it in September, back when my life had a different shape. I invited Daniel Holt. I did this through official channels. He was on the potential vendor list. His invitation was appropriate and unremarkable. I told no one why I had specifically added his name. His RSVP came back, confirmed 48 hours later. I told Claire about the event 2 weeks out, in the same tone I always used for these things. Business dinner, Tuesday the 12th, partners welcome. She said she'd come, of course. She said it without any change in expression. I spent those 2 weeks in a state I can only describe as precise. I was not angry. I was not sad. I had been both of those things, in private, in my car, or in the shower, or during the runs I'd started taking at 5 in the morning because sleep had become unreliable. But those emotions had passed through me and left behind something quieter and more durable. I had a plan, and the plan was simply this: let them be in the same room and watch. The night of the dinner, I dressed carefully. Claire wore a burgundy wrap dress and small gold earrings. She looked beautiful. I noticed it the way you notice weather, accurately, without sentiment. We arrived together. I worked the room. I was good at this by now. The handshakes, the names, the brief, genuine conversations that made people feel seen. Claire was at my side for the first 40 minutes, fluid and charming. I watched her out of the corner of my peripheral vision with a steadiness that surprised me. Daniel Holt arrived at 7:20. I saw the moment Claire saw him. Her weight shifted, barely a millimeter, toward the wall. Her fingers tightened on her wine glass. Then she relaxed it deliberately, and she was already halfway to a smile by the time I turned to greet him. "Daniel," I said, extending my hand. "Marcus Webb, glad you could make it." He shook my hand firmly. His eyes went to Claire for 1/4 of a second before coming back to me. "Marcus, great to meet you in person. I've heard a lot about Halstead's growth." "Have you?" I smiled. "This is my wife, Claire." "Hi." Her voice was composed, almost perfectly composed. "Claire," he said, "nice to meet you." They shook hands. I watched their hands. I watched Claire's face. I watched his. Neither of them flinched. I thought, they've practiced this or something like it. The dinner moved forward. I placed Daniel at the far end of the table, well away from Claire, who was seated to my right. I watched them across the room for 2 hours. They did not look at each other directly. That restraint, in its own way, was the most damning thing I'd seen all evening. I gave a short toast at 9 o'clock. For sentences, a glass raised, polite applause. I looked at Claire while I spoke. She was looking at the centerpiece. At 10:15, people began to leave. I was shaking hands at the door. Daniel Holt said his goodbyes, clapped me on the shoulder, said something warm and professional about following up with our regional team. Claire was across the room, saying goodbye to the wife of one of our Chicago clients. I said to Dennis, who was beside me, "I need to step out for a second, going to get the car from the lot." I handed him my drink. I went through the side exit, around the building, and cut across the upper lot where the service entrance was. I found a position behind a concrete pillar near the main lot exit. It was cold, 42 degrees, and the light was poor. I waited 4 minutes. Then I saw them. They came out of the parking level together. She was ahead of him by 2 steps, deliberate, plausibly deniable spacing. And they were talking. And then at the edge of the lot where the light thinned, she turned. He stepped toward her. She put her hand on the lapel of his jacket. He said something close to her ear. She laughed. That laugh, the one I hadn't heard directed at me in a year at least, the one that came from the back of her throat and meant she was entirely comfortable. Then she kissed him. Not long. Not a brush. A kiss that had history in it. I stood behind the pillar and watched it. I breathed carefully. I let myself see it completely. Let it land fully. Let it be real. Because I had been preparing for this, and I knew that the moment you look away is the moment you give yourself permission to doubt it later. She turned and walked back toward the restaurant entrance. He watched her go, then turned and walked toward the far row of cars. I waited 2 full minutes. Then I walked back inside through the side entrance, picked up my drink from the counter where I'd left it, and was standing at the bar with my phone when Claire came back in and said, "Ready whenever you are." 5 minutes, I said. I smiled at her. "Good night, don't you think?" "Really good," she said. In the car home, I talked about the event. The food, the venue, the clients I connected with. I was fluent and calm. Claire responded normally. We talked for 11 minutes, the length of the drive, and when I pulled into the driveway and she went inside, I sat in the car for a long time in the dark. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. The attorney's name was Margaret Solano. She had an office on 4th Street, in a manner that was precise without being cold. We met 3 times over 4 weeks. I said very little to anyone else during that period. I ran in the mornings. I cooked dinner. I helped Lily with a school project about the water cycle that she was entirely absorbed in and which I found, in its completeness, unexpectedly comforting. I told Claire I wanted a separation 2 weeks before Christmas. I chose a Tuesday evening, after Lily was asleep, at the kitchen table. I had a folder in front of me. Not dramatically, not as a prop, just present. "I need to tell you something," I said. and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She looked at my face. Something in her expression changed, a recognition, maybe, that the conversation she had been not imagining was here. I told her what I knew. Not everything. Not the parking lot. Not Daniel's name. I told her enough. That I had known for some time that she had been seeing someone. That I had not confronted her sooner because I needed to be certain. That I was certain now. And that I had spoken with a lawyer. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Marcus," I said, "let me finish." She stopped. "I'm not interested in a scene," I said. "I'm not angry, or I'm not angry in the way you might expect. I've had time with this. What I want now is to handle it as cleanly as we can, for Lily's sake. I'd like you to stay through the holidays. After January 1st, I think we should proceed." She started crying. Not performance. Real, the way she'd cried over the budget dispute with the German village clients. The way that had almost convinced me I was wrong. I looked at her and felt something complicated that I will not pretend to fully understand even now. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know. It wasn't. I don't even know how to explain it." "You don't have to." She asked me if I wanted to know why. I said I didn't. That was true at the time. Later it became less true, but by then the conversation was over and I wasn't going to reopen it. Christmas was strange and quiet. Ruth came, as planned. I behaved normally, because Lily needed normal and because I had made a private decision that this season would not be taken from her. Claire moved through it with a particular fragility. I could see her watching me, watching Lily, trying to gauge what Lily sensed. Lily sensed something. She was 9 and not a fool. But she was also absorbed in her gifts and her grandmother and the particular magic that age has, and I believe we gave her a Christmas she will remember without damage. I moved to a furnished apartment in mid-January. It was on the 7th floor of a building on Broad Street, clean and featureless and not particularly cold. I had books, my kitchen equipment, Fletcher, who I'd taken after a brief and oddly dignified negotiation that I think surprised Claire with its lack of drama. Lily stayed with me Thursday through Sunday every week. We cooked together, watched things on the television, went to her soccer games. She asked me twice, in different weeks, whether I was okay. I told her the truth. I was getting there. The divorce was finalized in April. Claire called me in June. I was on my couch on a Sunday, reading, Fletcher asleep across my feet. My phone showed her name, and I looked at it for a moment before answering. "Hi," she said. "Hi." A pause. "How are you?" "Good." "You?" "I'm all right." Another pause. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately. About what we had. I wanted to." She stopped. "I think I made the worst mistake of my life. I had been waiting for this, in some quiet way, since January. Not hoping for it. Not dreading it. Just knowing it was likely. Because people do this. They leave and then they recalculate. They measure the distance between what they had and what they chose instead, and sometimes the math changes." "Claire," I said. "I know," she said quickly. "I know you might not want to." "I don't," I said. "I'm sorry." Silence. "I mean that kindly," I said. "I genuinely hope things are good for you. I hope the studio is going well. I want good things for you, for Lily's sake, and also because we were together for a long time, and that meant something to me. But I'm not the same person I was in that marriage. I don't mean that badly. I mean it's just true." She said she understood. I don't know if she did. We hung up, and I sat with Fletcher on the couch in the June light coming through the window, and I felt something I can only describe as clear. Not happy, not victorious, just clear. The way a room feels after you've opened the windows and let the old air out. Lily was coming the next day. We were going to the Science Museum, which she had been requesting for 6 weeks. I made a list of things to pick up at the store. I went to bed when it got dark, and I slept without difficulty, and when I woke up the light was good. What this story traces, at its core, is the particular cruelty of chosen blindness. Marcus was not a naive man. He was perceptive, professionally successful, detail-oriented. And yet he stood in front of every signal that his marriage was in crisis and made the active choice, repeatedly, to look away. The first red flag was there at the gala itself, Claire's body language at table 11. He saw it. He named it. He watched it for 10 seconds, felt its weight, and then was interrupted and deliberately did not return to it. Looking back, that moment was not an accident of circumstance. It was the first of many exits he would construct for himself, because the alternative was a conversation that would cost him everything he'd built. The second red flag was the phone, face down on the couch arm. He felt something shift in him that evening. Not thought, felt. And then he spent the next 4 paragraphs of his own inner life explaining it away. He asked himself to trust the reasonable explanations because the unreasonable one was still affordable to deny. The turning point was Lily's comment about the backyard phone call, not because it gave him new information, but because it came from outside his own management of the situation. A child's innocent observation bypassed every defense he'd constructed. You can rationalize away your own perceptions. It is harder to rationalize away your 9-year-olds. The second turning point was seeing her car outside Daniel's office. That was the moment the door closed on ambiguity. Everything after was preparation. What Marcus did right, and what came at real cost, was wait. Not from passivity, but from clarity. He understood that confronting Claire with suspicion gave her the ability to shape the narrative. Confronting her with certainty gave him the ground. The lesson that stays is this: we are most dangerous to ourselves not when we ignore the obvious, but when we are intelligent enough to construct plausible alternatives to it. What this story ultimately reveals is something about the architecture of long-term intimacy, how the very familiarity that sustains a marriage can also become its vulnerability. Marcus had become so fluent in Claire that he could read her signals without registering them. The face-down phone, the changed posture in a ballroom, the jacket from a boutique on the same day as the gala. These were not subtle clues. They were present. He had the perceptual capacity to catch every one of them. What he lacked was the willingness to follow them to their conclusion. What Claire lost, and this is the thing her June phone call revealed most clearly, was not just a marriage but a person. Marcus did not re-enter the relationship as a wounded version of himself. He left it, processed it, and became someone quieter and more settled. The man who answered the phone in June was not the man she had left. The door she knocked on was not the door she'd walked out of. There is something worth sitting with in the subplot of Lily. The child perceived, without vocabulary, that something was wrong in the house. Her comment about the backyard phone call was not an attempt to alert her father. She didn't know what she was observing, but she was observing it. Children in disrupted households always are. The real damage in betrayals like this one is not the discovered affair, but the months of managed pretense, the dinner table silences, the composed performances that children absorb before anyone admits what's happening. Marcus's silence after discovering everything was not purely strategic. It was also grief being processed in the only register available to a man who had built his emotional life around competence and control. He expressed his devastation by becoming more precise. That is its own kind of wound. Here's what sits with me about this story long after it ends. It's not the betrayal itself. That's awful, but it's a thing that happens. What stays is the 11 months before the parking lot, the couch with the face-down phone, the backyard laughter in the cold, the way Marcus felt something shift in his chest that Thursday and then spent the next paragraph of his own life talking himself out of it. How many of us have done exactly that? How many times have we felt the truth and then, very quietly, very competently, talked ourselves into the version that costs less? And what does it mean that the clearest moment in the entire story isn't the confrontation? It's a man reading on a couch with a dog across his feet, watching June light come through the window. Maybe the real ending was never about Claire at all. Maybe it was just Marcus learning to stay in the room with himself.